Hello and welcome to the video. So this week Stadia kind of, but also didn't, announce their first partner for their white labeling service of the Google Stadia cloud gaming. However, a lot of people have kind of taken this as a real big negative, and obviously some media outlets have been reporting on how this means it's the death of Stadia and all of that. And we wanted to kind of give you our take on it and some of the massive pros that we see of this sort of approach to it, and also a couple of the potential negatives as well. So let's get on with it. So in case you're not too sure what all of this is about, so Google at the beginning of the year talked about the fact that they would ultimately start leading their service to being more of a white labeling service, which means they would do the infrastructure and the back end for other cloud gaming platforms. So imagine someone like Ubisoft, for example, they decide to go all in on cloud gaming, which they have done quite a lot recently, but they want their own cloud gaming service, Ubisoft Cloud or whatever it's going to be called. Well, with this, they'd be able to basically rent out that service from Google Stadia and have their own cloud gaming service packaged up and ready to go and just branded as their own, just running on Google Stadia hardware and all their software and back-end stuff. Now, the first partner seems to be AT&T, and they've just released Arkham Knight, so it's a playable demo that you'll be able to use. It's not available on mobile phones or tablet as far as I'm aware. However, it is available to play at the moment, no download required, and it is all done through cloud gaming. There isn't really any mention of Stadia, but when people have started doing some digging into it, it very much seems to be that it is all running on the Stadia hardware and seems to be their first white labeling partner. Looks like it runs extremely smoothly, as you would expect from something that's been powered by Stadia, but a lot of media outlets have kind of taken the headlines of this is kind of Google's last ditch attempt to save Stadia, it's their last thing before it kind of just goes out completely, but it doesn't really seem that accurate when you actually look at it logically. So all thoughts of Stadia aside, you might love Stadia, you might hate Stadia, you might be impartial to Stadia. Let's just push that aside for a moment and think about what white labeling means really for Google and why this is potentially a good thing. Now, the first thing is it's a massively good thing for cloud gaming in general, which helps to push all of the platforms forward. By getting cloud gaming out to people who maybe would have never tried it or signed up for any of the services because it's now suddenly available through the subscription plan or it's being advertised a little bit more, then that will hopefully get people kind of seeing that cloud gaming does work and it has a future and it is a viable way to game. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be great for Google Stadia, but it will be good, hopefully, for pretty much all of the cloud gaming platforms because people are getting used to it, they're getting kind of shown off to what those possibilities are, and that in turn will lead to more people playing on cloud gaming. So that's one of the very first kind of broad positives by this sort of approach. The other positive is that as Google start to get more partners using the Google Stadia infrastructure, ultimately those publishers, as they start to release their games, will also have to do the work on the back end to get their games to run on that Google Stadia hardware. Now ultimately they'll want to kind of package it all up and have it as their own service. So for example with AT&T, they're going to want to have Batman Arkham Knight. It's probably their exclusive. Maybe, worst case scenario, they keep it as their exclusive forever and it never shows up on Stadia. But at the end of the day, we all know publishers like one thing, and that is money. They love their money. We've seen this time and time again. Can you imagine EA launching their own cloud gaming service and going through all the work to make it work on the Google Stadia backend, but they're never ever releasing those games that they port onto Google Stadia where they would basically print money because there are that many people who want those games? We can definitely see this as being more of a timed exclusive when it comes to publishers and their cloud gaming services, but then eventually rolling out to Google Stadia, which is a massive win because it means those games will start to hopefully trickle across to Stadia. Worst case scenario, they never ever become available through the store on Google Stadia, but at the end of the day, Google is still making money from that entire service, which is a big win. The next thing is it allows Google the opportunity to test out new features on a smaller basis without kind of getting drawn into the media controversy that is Google Stadia. For example, with AT&T, they could ultimately roll out some higher end hardware to be able to power that service on a demo basis, test it out with a smaller user base, see how it's working, and then if it does work well, potentially roll it out to the rest of Google Stadia. At the moment, because they do have this, a negative portrayal by the media, if they do anything and it doesn't work particularly well, they are going to get called out for it, and it's going to really hurt the Stadia brand, just because that's how people seem to approach Stadia at the moment. They just find anything they can possibly get and, just throw some shade at them. So this gives them a really nice little way to do it, like a test bed, and see how things are working. The next one is that it allows them to make money from the service regardless. So even if Google Stadia itself is in the storefront and the games that they've got at the moment is unsuccessful, hopefully by partnering up with other brands like AT&T and potentially other brands in the future as well, it means that Google starts to make money and it becomes profitable to have that back end. Now that profit will then hopefully get reinvested back into that whole cloud gaming infrastructure, whatever that looks like at the time, means they can start to upgrade the hardware, they can push more things forward, and ultimately that will then, fingers crossed, trickle across to the Google Stadia platform itself. Would start to see the benefits of increased graphics, increased performance, and everything else because it becomes a profitable entire package. So even if the Stadia platform itself isn't, again, that storefront and that package that we see it today isn't profitable, hopefully then the rest of it becomes profitable because they've got so many different partners and they're getting a cut of whatever sales they make and everything there, which all then gets reinvested back into the platform, which helps it all to grow. Now, of course, it wouldn't be right if we didn't talk about some of the negatives as well, and I know we have covered off a couple of them there and they have been linked into other things, but one of the big potential pitfalls of this sort of thing is that, for example, if they're getting different partners and they're all signing up and those cloud gaming platforms really start to take off, they become really profitable, but Google Stadia stays where it is and doesn't really grow, then that kind of presents a bit of a problem where at the end of the day, a business is there to make money and a business is there to do things that will help it grow and to become more profitable. And if the Stadia platform as we know and love it right now stays exactly where it is as all of the other cloud gaming platforms start to take off in terms of partnerships, then that could be the nail in the coffin for the Stadia side of things. Because that means that Google don't need to axe the service completely. And all of that hardware and software doesn't need to be destroyed and just dismantled. It can stay there and power all of the partnerships that they've got going. And they could just kill Stadia off quietly or loudly, whoever knows. So that is one of the pitfalls there, is something that's maybe becomes a little bit more appealing to them, maybe a little bit more profitable. It could start to lean towards that. Fingers crossed that won't happen. In our opinion, that seems unlikely because all of those benefits that come from those partnerships will start to trickle across into Stadia. So fingers crossed that won't happen, but it's definitely one worthwhile bearing in mind. So that's it for our pros and cons of the white labeling of Google Stadia. There are so many things that could potentially come out of this that will help to really boost the performance and the overall acceptance of something like Google Stadia or cloud gaming as a whole. So we personally think it's a big win. There is obviously a risk with this sort of thing that effort then starts to go into the partnerships rather than the Stadia platform, that as different partners start to roll out their own cloud gaming platforms, they'll potentially keep those games as exclusives and won't bring them across to Stadia. Who knows? But at the end of the day, there do seem to be a lot of potential positives from this, and I definitely don't think that this is the doom and gloom that a lot of the media sources seem to be reporting it as. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think this is like a final death blow for Google Stadia, or do you think there are positives in it like we've talked about? There definitely seems to be a lot potentially that could go great with this. There's also a couple of things that could potentially go wrong, but who knows? Who knows what Google plans to do in the future with Google Stadia? So as always, I hope you've enjoyed that video, and if you have, hit that like and subscribe button and come along for some more awesome content in the future. And if you've got any questions, throw them down in the comments below and we'll do our best to answer them. See you next time. Bye.